I accidentally discovered an online shrine. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story, so I'm going to share it here. This happened after I went to university, so I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with, because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social. So when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason not to go. We talked about school and that kind of thing. Nothing noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily. I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple of seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess she just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after our one shared class. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So, it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea of why. It was hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtle hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it, because what was I going to say? I've never known what to do when a friend makes a pass at me. I was also not interested in the least. Even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled, Lily was not my type at all. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, Lily asked if I'd go for a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said all right. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log, and I joined her. She started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. I got out of there, and was happy to think I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in my friend group. A lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well. And basically, the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily, because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my breakup and this new relationship, so she must have thought she missed her chance to be with me. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life, and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book they were trying to study. The reply was basically, I don't know. Sorry. But the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous. It is linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life other than my boyfriend knew about my page. Well, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interests, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me about such and such, he went to a nightclub recently, etc., as well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it here in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous of anyone else who came near me. So my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he didn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend, Stephen. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her posts talked a lot about Stephen and how great a friend he was and how much fun they had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it with, "Stephen sent this to me. He knew I would like it and I love it," or something like that. The problem was, the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her because in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who was always looking out for her and her soulmate who was bound to end up with her when I finally got over my sweet, kind boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me and got messages back from her followers. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with the stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me and we were bound to break up soon so I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake fanfiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into this page's history. I did not look at everything that was there. It was too much. So, I'm not sure how long this had been going on. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing, and I cannot stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me, and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend, and building a fantasy life with two different versions of me in it, that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like hadn't happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it, she just changed the subject, even after I pushed, and it was like she hadn't even registered what I said. I've never seen anything else like it. She deleted the page, of course, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end, though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes, and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person, knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me, for who knows how long freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends. None of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, letting me know she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think she was part of my life while ignoring her rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She tried to start conversations, asked me to meet up with her. Attempts are usually ignored. I didn't like to think she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened. At first, she asked me some questions about how long had I known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of thing I'd tell anyone who asked. Then, she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. She went into plenty of detail about fantasies she had of the two of us. Again, we were not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 a minute, way too fast for me to reply, before the next one arrived, basically quoting back what I told her about myself and my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually had happened to her, even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I'd told her only hours before were now her life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah. I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to talk to me, and I eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered because I know if I delete it, she'll only send another one. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights. And even then, it's only the stuff I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I know it did. So girl who spent 12 years obsessing over me, fetishizing me, stalking me, and harassing me. Let's not meet again. The fantasy life you built for the two of us in your head is the only place you'll be seeing me anytime soon. My coworker may soon be a victim of human trafficking. Hi, I'm new to this site, and I'm not sure if this is allowed in the category. If so, feel free to remove it. Anyways, I'm currently starting to fear for my coworker's life. My coworker, who I will call Jane, is 33 years old. She is a virgin and a very devout Christian. Her family is very strict and very religious. I'm not bashing on the religion in any way. I was raised a Christian myself. These people, though, they just seem to take their beliefs to a new extreme. Think of them as the Flanders from The Simpsons. I mention that Jane is a virgin because she has honestly never even had a boyfriend before. She's been on a few dating websites as of late, but she's usually very strict when it comes to the types of guys she would date. She can be kind of stuck up, which has gained her very little popularity. She recently met a guy on OkCupid. Let's call him Miguel. Miguel claims to live in a bigger city than ours, an hour away. We are in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and that he is 35 years old, also claims to be a virgin, and takes an interest in Jane. They chat for a while, and she's very excited. Once they establish a fondness for each other, he claims that he has $250,000 in savings and a job at Cessna that pays $65 an hour. He has a nice apartment and 2 cars, one of which is a '69 Dodge Charger. Sounds too good to be true, right? We all agree. Everyone but her. They agree to meet for a first date, and he says he'll drive down here to see her. While driving down here, he claims to have gotten into an accident on the interstate and is left hospitalized. Jane is devastated. The rest of us, who she was telling this to, all just assumed that he was lying to her, and this was his way of getting out of the date and her finding out that he was scum. We didn't think there'd be any more communication afterwards. We were wrong. They continued talking, and shortly after getting out of the hospital, he claimed he was hit by a car crossing the street. His life apparently took a turn for the worse, as he claimed he was laid off from Cessna, his apartment was burglarized, and all of his money and his other car were seized by the IRS due to a misunderstanding in his taxes from a few years back. Completely believable stories, right? Much to our dismay, Jane decides she doesn't care about these things, and she is willing to continue talking to the man. He soon starts calling her daily, and coming over once a week to visit her at work. At this point, we get to meet this guy, and he comes off as your typical loser with a beer belly who lies around on the couch all day yelling at his woman to bring him a beer. Despite all of the money he claims to have, he wears clothes that are way too big for him, usually sweatpants and flip-flops. This earned him the nickname Flip-Flops amongst us at work. He has problems making eye contact with people when he talks to them, and has the creepiest smile. We know right away that he doesn't seem very trustworthy. 3 weeks into their relationship, he shows up at our work and proposes to Jane. She gladly agrees, as we all shake our heads in disbelief. He tells us he got a new job working for Microsoft down in his city. We did our research. There are no Microsoft jobs over there unless you're working in selling products at Best Buy. And he tells her that he's now seeing a therapist for his anger and jealousy issues. Many red flags are going off in our heads at this point, but Jane doesn't seem to mind any of it. He moves down here to be with her after claiming that his family disowned him for wanting to marry a Christian. He claims they're all devout Catholics. And that's the reason why she'll never get to meet them. As if this isn't ridiculous and over the top enough, things start to get creepier from here. He tells us that he has a new job for $25 an hour as the head engineer at Exide Manufacturing. The head of HR at Exide is actually a relative of a friend of ours, so we asked her about this. They never heard of this man, and the position he claims he has doesn't exist. We try to tell Jane about it, but she brushes off all of our comments and claims that we are thinking too much about it, or we're just jealous. He starts picking her up and dropping her off from work every single day, as well as picking her up for all of her lunches. She still believes he has a full-time job, and that he's only doing this because of how much he loves her. We start to feel that he's just wanting to know where she is at all times. He asks the maintenance man at our work, after their first meeting, to be the best man at his wedding. This doesn't strike Jane as odd, because apparently Miguel is just untrusting of most people and has no friends of his own. They all want him for his money. Her parents loaned him their spare van, so he can use that to drive from now on. To our shock, her parents are already buying baby clothes and supplies. For the couple, they are completely won over by the man. I think they're just blinded by the fact that their daughter finally has someone and will give them grandkids, which is a really sad thought. By this point, we've noticed her personality growing slightly more stressed and depressed as time goes on. Now, if you've read up to this point, you're probably thinking, oh, she's just another dumb girl who picked up a sleazeball guy who's milking her for all she's worth. And you're definitely not wrong. We all thought the same thing, until she one day dropped this little bomb on us. He has just recently told her that he used to be special ops in the military, the Air Force to be exact, and they've decided that they want him to work for them again. They'll pay him $75K for working 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months. The story always changes, something she doesn't find suspicious at all. He will be testing military equipment that's too dangerous and could be life-threatening. He agrees to the work, and we all think he's copping out of the relationship. She then tells us that if she wishes to remain in contact with him, they'll have to get married as soon as possible, and she'll have to be prepared to move away with him. She explains that the military has been calling her and making stops at their house to explain to her that she'll have to marry him immediately, and she needs to be prepared to move to an undisclosed location at any given moment. From that location, she'll not be allowed to make any contact with friends or family, since all that is going on is top secret, and she has to prove that she can be trusted. Obviously, all of us are now alarmed. Everyone. But her and her family. They are delighted that she's with a military man, and are proud that she gets to be a part of something much bigger. The rest of us, sane people, are trying to figure out what on earth he can be plotting. Is she going to be hijacked into human trafficking? Is he going to murder her? One of our coworkers has just called the human trafficking hotline, and they think that this definitely sounds like something they've seen before. Unfortunately, they can't do anything about it until he actually makes a move and takes her. We're looking into contacting our local police to see if there's anything that can be done about this before she gets the phone call that tells her when they have to make their move. This is all so crazy. We don't know what to expect, or just what danger she's really in. Any thoughts? Would be appreciated, and thank you for reading. Update. The first time I met Miguel, it was on a freight day at work. We all work in a retail store. Jane and the rest of her department had just finished their freight, and they were allowed to go home for the day. I grumbled as I worked in the department next to them, and had to finish my freight by myself. I work right next to the time clock, so I saw Jane clock out. About 10 minutes later, a guy shows up in sweatpants and flip-flops. He smiles creepily at me as he wanders around her department. I continue putting up my freight. He walks up to me and hands me a Pepsi. Can you give this to Jane, please? Oh, sorry, dude. She just clocked out for the day. What? His face dropped as he darted to the front door. I shrugged it off and continued working. A few minutes later he comes back, slightly flustered. Her car is still out there. She's still here. I gave him a funny look and stated that I saw her clock out. He stormed off again. A few more moments later he returns, furious. Her car is out there. Where is she? I was a bit alarmed. Jane is pretty obese, so I thought to myself it was probably taking her that long to get across the store. Do I need to get a manager on you? Where is Jane? Fortunately for me, my boyfriend showed up at the time. He expected me to get off at the same time as the rest of my coworkers, so he came in trying to find me. Did you say Jane? I just saw her in the parking lot. Flip-Flop stormed out as my boyfriend, and I gave each other what the fuck looks. The next morning, Miguel showed up at work and proposed to Jane in our stockroom as we were unpacking boxes. My boyfriend laughed when I told him this. He wasn't surprised that Jane was dating that Neanderthal. Looking back on it now, I think that the fact that Jane could slip through this guy's grasp and actually do something unnoticed by him freaked him out. He didn't have as much control as he wanted. That might have instigated his proposal, making him want to make sure he had complete control over her, which is a terrifying thought. Alright guys, boy was this unexpected for me. As some of you in the comments have seen, I initially tried posting this over a month ago. It, however, kept getting caught in the algorithm of a bot in this forum, and was flagged and immediately taken down. No matter how many times I edited it, apparently it was a wall of text. I finally got it approved a few days ago, and that's why it's up here for you to see now. As you can imagine, a lot has happened over the past month, and that's why I'm here now to let you all know just what has happened since. To those who want the short answer, she is fine now, and the situation is nearly completely resolved. Long answer, keep reading. To answer a few questions, I'll start with, to those of you who guessed Wichita, Kansas. You are mostly correct. Wichita is the city where he's from. Geez, you guys are good. Why not hire a PI? Well, quite frankly, I don't have the kind of money for that. Why don't you and your coworkers all pitch in to get one? Honestly, the majority of my coworkers really don't like Jane. And that's putting it nicely. I know this will sound cruel, but most of them were just counting down the days until they didn't have to see her anymore. She's always had this bad habit of rubbing people the wrong way. Is she a naive girl? Yes. Is she stupid? Also yes. Ever since I've met her, she's always insisted on being the first to give relationship advice to me and many others, despite having no experience of her own. She's actually the first to throw in her opinion and give advice on most subjects, usually on stuff that she only thinks she knows everything about. She comes off as a know-it-all and is very arrogant. Having done missionary trips in Africa before, she assumes she's seen the worst of humanity, and she's more than knowledgeable of the evil of the world. She also likes to butt into the business of everyone, whether she's welcome or not. A few coworkers have tried setting her up on dates before, and when she comes back from them she is usually furious and gives a lecture on how dare you think he was good enough for me. I would also like to state that this is not the direct result of her faith and religion, so you guys can stop throwing that as an excuse. It does play a part in it, but most of it is the fault of her own personality, I would say. I'm a Christian also, and I was also raised in a very sheltered life. I was homeschooled all throughout high school, and everyone I knew was from our church. I didn't have my first date until I was 20, and he became my first boyfriend. He's an agnostic metalhead, and my parents insisted he go to church with us before he could be approved. He showed up in trip pants, spikes, and studs, and a shirt that baldy read, "Fuck." He was nothing but kind to the congregation, and they had to have a type of intervention with me the next day to make us break up. We are still together to this day, and our 7-year anniversary is this Halloween. I'm very capable of making my own decisions, and my number one rule is to not be an asshole. If my religion calls me to be an asshole, I tell it to fuck off. I never try to force it on anyone. My beliefs are for me and me alone. I understand common sense and reasoning, and though I've been through hardships, my life is pretty decent. So no, I will not take Jane's religion or sheltered life as an excuse for her ignorance and lack of common sense. Sorry for talking about me, I was just trying to prove a point. Now, with these bits of info, I will continue the story. Around the same time this story was originally posted, I think the same weekend, it turns out that Jane and Miguel had had a secret wedding ceremony at her church and were now married. Yes, there was a certificate and everything, full-blown, legally binding marriage. None of his friends or family were present, only Jane's family and their pastor. She hid it from the rest of us for about a week. During these days of us being in the dark, we noticed a lot of mood shifts with her. One day, she would come in beaming and happy, and the world was perfect for her. The next day, we could see the stress and tell that something was wrong. A few of us also noted at this same time that both Jane's and Miguel's Facebook accounts had been deleted. He had a recently made account, no pictures of him, just pictures of his nice cars. He rarely used it, and all of his family on the account looked nothing like him. Some of you noticed in the comments that I had mentioned him being blondish-haired, blue-eyed, and light, though dirty-looking skin. He claims he's Spanish, but all of his family was very distinctly Mexican-looking. We were afraid that he didn't want her usual overly talkative self to give too much info about their situation, movements, and whereabouts when he kidnapped her. She confided in a coworker that he had a lot of outbursts, and though he hadn't been violent, he had suddenly become a different person. We tried warning her that he was dangerous, but she assured us that he was just insecure from having been cheated on in so many past relationships, and that it was nothing. It was sad to say she was definitely in an abusive relationship. The saddest part is seeing a situation like this, and knowing that they can only help themselves at this point when they refuse to listen to everyone else. Jane also had a pet cat that she's had for nearly 8 years to this point. Miguel was always getting angry at the cat, accusing Jane of loving it more than him, etc. Her cat likes to paw at its food bowl when you pour food into it, and one day, as he was trying to feed it, she playfully pawed. He went into a rage, stating that the cat was trying to attack him, and as punishment, it should go without food. For days when Jane would come home from work, she would notice her cat getting more depressed, and it would cry a lot more. He would assure Jane that the cat is fine, I fed it twice today, don't feed it, or it'll get fat. He was trying to starve and was probably abusing her poor cat, and she didn't see this as a sign to leave the arsehole. Shortly after these incidents, Jane wound up incredibly sick and had to get rushed to the ER. She had a high fever, but that is the extent to which she told us at work. She didn't return for 3 days. We were terrified that he had tried to poison her or something to get rid of her. She didn't find it strange at all that he wasn't at work for the days she was sick at home. It was this time that word made it to our work that they had been married. She came back to work, seemed to be fine. Around this time, Miguel got a phone call from the military, stating that he had to report to Fort Scott for top-secret weapons testing, and shortly after this, they would have to prepare for their big move. I dare you to look up Fort Scott, Kansas, and see if that seems like the kind of place that would do super dangerous top-secret military weapons testing. I couldn't begin to tell you how many lies he's told that could be easily disproven by a simple Google search. She never questioned him about any of this. Unfortunately for him, the family van of hers that he'd been driving had broken down on his way to the test site, and her father had to come and bring him home. By pure luck, the military called afterwards and told him that the equipment he was testing had exploded and killed a few men, so he was so lucky to have not turned up that day. They changed his plans, and his next top-secret mission would be next April, and it would be then that he and Jane would get to move. With this said, I would like to point out that I do get along with Jane. I do understand some of where she's coming from, and I don't blame the rest of my coworkers one bit for not liking her. A few of us still agree that, as annoying as she can be, and despite how stupid she's being, she still doesn't deserve to be murdered or trafficked or whatever would happen to her. So for those of us that cared, we were glad that we at least had until April to figure out what we could do. To continue from here, I will explain that before they were married, Jane was surprisingly good at keeping to her beliefs. Miguel had to live with another man from Jane's church and not with her, so as to keep their marriage bed sacred and not be tempted. Miguel made it abundantly clear to Jane that he hated these arrangements and would try to start fights whenever it was made clear he wasn't going to get laid anytime soon. A week or so after the van broke down, a letter arrived at the house of the man Miguel had been staying with. It was inquiring about why he had missed the court date for giving away his parental rights back to his wife. Fortunately, this man from the church actually had common sense, so he met up with one of Jane's sisters to discuss what to do. Despite all of her family fully loving and supporting the couple, one of her sisters was actually hesitant and showed some doubts. There's a sign of intelligent life after all. Jane's sister used this information to find Miguel's wife on Facebook and talk to her, while the churchman ran a $30 background check on Miguel. A free background check had been run on him before, but nothing suspicious turned up. Surprisingly, this one also turned up nothing. He had to shell out $200 for a real background check, which safely showed how much of what Miguel had said about himself was complete bull. Miguel had been married twice up to this point. He had 4 children with his first wife, and they had both given up custody of the kids who were now living with Miguel's parents. The real reason that Jane was never going to meet his family. He had 1 kid with his most recent wife, and they had just gotten divorced. Their divorce was finalized a few days before Miguel and Jane's wedding. Sadly, this is all of the information that we coworkers were able to find out that turned up in the background check. No one has told us anything else. Jane's sister printed out copies of the marriage certificates, and they got the church together to show them to Jane. They were all able to convince her that Miguel was a lying dirtbag and helped kick him out of the house. He denied all of it until he was hauled away to a psych ward for suicide watch that night. He was released a few days later, after proving himself sane. Jane issued a no-contact order and has cut off all communication with him as she proceeds to get an annulment. Jane was devastated for about a week, but she's mostly over it now. Gee, it's almost as though she was only really in love with the thought of this man's money and valor, and not him himself. And the hardest part of the situation was dealing with the blow to her ego, knowing how stupid she had been. Sadly, this didn't last very long, as she now boldly tells everyone the tale of how strong she is for getting through all of this, and how brave she was. She assures everyone that Miguel was a master con artist, and he was able to fool everyone. Her family and church back her up in all of these claims, seeing as they were all fooled too. To this day, I don't think she really learnt anything of value from this situation, just that she likes having everyone pat her on the back and tell her how brave she is. I apologize for making you all lose your faith in humanity. I assure you mine is now gone too. For anyone still claiming that this story is fake, I tell you one thing. I believe in strong female heroines. This story goes against everything I've ever held dear to my beliefs. I would never make this up, because I wouldn't want people to think anyone was capable of being this dumb. I apologize to anyone who was hoping for a more scary outcome, but this is just how it all went down. To try to answer, or not answer, a few more questions, I'll just discuss a bit more on the subject. The only thing that Jane and her church really care about is that Miguel had lied about being married. To this day, I can't find out what his plans were once they disappeared in April. She is still holding no contact with him, and so I cannot find out this information. Jane's just too distraught over the fact that he wasn't the 35-year-old virgin of her dreams to care about any danger she could have been in. So I'm unsure if it will ever be answered if this man is a murderer or a human trafficker or whatever. All we know is that he is definitely a lazy bum, a deadbeat dad, and an abusive arsehole. And stupid. Very, very stupid. We also believe that he genuinely believes all of his lies, since he was so insistent on all of them being true up until court time, as far as we can see. So definitely thinking some kind of mental problems in there. I haven't heard of the Dirty John podcast before, but I'll definitely make time to listen. It does sound interesting. Maybe I can have her listen to see if she actually learned something from all of this. Now, purely for your amusement, I will compile a list of some of the lies he's told her, that she believed wholeheartedly, that haven't been mentioned. He's a black belt in many martial arts, which helped get him his super high ranks in the military, etc. He offered to try teaching her karate once, but she hurt herself at the very start, and she has made no attempts since. He's also a world championship gamer, Halo being his top game. He said he is in many games, but I don't remember the list she rattled on. He has won many competitions, and as a result, he's worked on the development of a few of the other Halo games and has many ties to Microsoft, hence why he's gotten jobs there before so easily. At one point Jane did see in the mail from him a letter about owing child support. Upon questioning him, he assured her that he was a virgin and had previously adopted the child of a former girlfriend of his. He loved the child dearly, and it needed a father figure. We had a festival in town in the summertime, and he was offered over $200 a day to help set up for it. Other coworkers worked to help with this festival. It was a volunteer event, and no one working at it had ever heard of the man. She came home one day and found him not working at the festival. He said he had to leave because he had gotten heat stroke. She rushed him to the ER, where they stayed for hours, because no matter how much they tried, no signs of heat stroke were found. She spent days nursing him back to health as he was bedridden. I think it was the '69 Dodge Charger he claimed that he had at the beginning of the story that was involved in the car accident he'd also had at the beginning. He had to make a sudden trip back home to Wichita one day and said he was picking up the Charger from the impound lot. Jane was excited. She wanted to fix it up and couldn't wait to show it off and drive it around. Later that same day, he called and said it was too damaged, so he had to scrap it for parts, and the money had to go to the fee for holding it. Jane was crushed. About a month later, when I saw him driving around in her family's car, I mentioned that if he no longer had any vehicle of his own, the IRS would have to give him back one of his cars. Suddenly, it turned out that the Charger wasn't scrapped at all. It was actually being redone in Jane's favorite colors, and was going to be a wedding gift to her. Oh, happy day. Eventually, he actually got a part-time job at a factory in town, after lying for days about his exile job that didn't exist, and told Jane that he was offered $45 an hour there as their head engineer, where he would be head of maintenance. Coincidentally, that position already belonged to the husband of another coworker. Hooray for small towns. And he certainly doesn't make $45 an hour, just closer to $20. She didn't want to burst Jane's bubble, so she was never confronted about it. The 3 days she was sick from work started the same day he started his new job at this factory. When she asked him why he was home, he stated that he went to work and they told him that they didn't have any of his contact information to tell him that he wasn't starting that day. But because this was all their fault, he was allowed to clock in and go home so that he wasn't losing any money. Edit. Upon talking to Jane yesterday, she now fancies herself an expert in the early signs of an abusive relationship and wants to write a book on the subject. I think it's a great idea. There aren't really any books out there on abusive relationships, and I would love to be the voice of it, she says. Being a writer, I cringe at the very thought. I apologize if I sound bitter. I might just be more disgusted than bitter, but meh. I knew him for 8 years and looked up to him, until I finally discovered there was something very wrong with him. This isn't scary per se, but it's always creepy when someone you have known forever and thought of like a mentor is revealed to be something much, much different. So I had this boss who I'll call Mike, and he had come to fill in for a few months while my regular boss was on maternity leave. He was pretty amazing. He inspired me to work harder and even ended up promoting me. The two of us and a third employee that I'll call James were always working shifts together. It was fun, just laughing and kicking ass because we all had a similar sense of humor, and James and I were definitely the best employees there. After Mike's time to fill in was over, James and I were super bummed because he was seriously the best manager. He was fair and rewarded hard work and truly cared about employee satisfaction. Plus, he just made everything fun, even though we were working harder. We both looked up to Mike as a manager and as a human being. We had the utmost respect for him, and we vowed to keep in touch when we parted ways. Well, fast forward a year or so, James and I ended up dating. We kept in touch with Mike, and he was so happy we ended up together because he thought we were both great people who deserved each other. We saw Mike a few more times and kept in touch over the years through social media. When James proposed and we started planning our wedding, we knew we wanted Mike to be in it. He was part of our trio back before James and I even knew we would be together, and the three of us had a bond. We asked him to read something during the ceremony, and he accepted, expressing how honored he felt. Well, when it got to the day of the wedding, Mike was nowhere to be seen. We kept calling him as the ceremony was quickly approaching, and finally James got hold of him. Mike told him he couldn't get out of work and wouldn't be able to make it. We were both taken aback a little because the Mike we knew and looked up to would never bail like this and not even let us know. We figured there had to be some reasonable explanation, and we were pretty disappointed, but the wedding had to go on. We had James's niece do the reading, even though Mike's name was printed in the program. Well, fast forward again a few more years. We had only spoken to Mike a handful of times since the wedding, but he had also taken the time to write me a beautiful, lengthy recommendation letter in that time period. There were no hard feelings about the wedding, and James and I still shared the highest of opinions of our friend. Then Mike kind of disappeared off of social media, and the next time we tried calling him, his phone number had changed. James and I exchanged sentiments of concern and hoped he was doing okay, but it didn't go much past that. One day, James got a random call from a number that wasn't in his contact list. He answered it, and it turned out to be Mike, so he put it on speakerphone so I could say hello too. We had our brief pleasantries, but then Mike got into the reason for his call. He wanted to know if he could stay with us for a day or two. My initial reaction was, of course. But James shot me a sharp look. So I added, well, let us discuss it and we'll call you back. Before concluding the call, James inquired about what was going on. Mike said he'd been living with his father to care for him because he was terminally ill, but that he couldn't stay there another night because he'd checked the camera footage in their home and seen his dad on tape standing over him with a knife while he slept. When the call was ended, James said he thought something was off. I didn't really get why he'd instantly be that suspicious. I mean, the story was insane and all, but it was Mike. James said something like, "We haven't heard from him in forever, and now he's calling us for a favor? He lives 2 hours away, and we're the ones he calls? Why wouldn't he seek the help of someone closer? He has family in the area too." I agreed that it was all odd, and it definitely conjured up a lot of questions, including why there were even cameras inside their house. But I still didn't like the idea of leaving Mike hanging if he was truly out of options. I told James we should call back and probe a little more. When we called back, James asked if it wouldn't be easier to have someone closer help him out, and asked about family in the area. Mike gave a vague explanation of why everyone in his life had turned against him. Then, with the most mopey, disappointed voice, he said it was okay if we couldn't help, that he understood what was going on and wouldn't bother us anymore. James and I looked at each other and said we'd call him right back. We quickly discussed that this was all very strange, but that he had to be pretty desperate to contact us for help. We acknowledged that his little bit about understanding if we were unable to help was meant to manipulate us, and we felt conflicted about everything but ultimately decided a few days couldn't hurt. We called him back, told him he could come, and figured we'd give him the address, and that would be that. But he said he no longer had a vehicle and would need to be picked up. We asked about catching an Uber, and he said he had no money he could access at the moment, which we didn't press him on. It was getting late, and it was a long drive to his location, so we asked if he had anywhere to stay for that night, and we could make the trip in the morning. He said he'd just sleep on a park bench or something, which again we knew was meant to manipulate us, but we didn't cave in on that one. We asked where we should pick him up the following day, and he gave us his dad's address. Immediately after we got off the phone, we were like, what the fuck has been going on with Mike that has ostracized him from all his friends and family and caused him to lose his car? He had been making 4 times our salary when we all first met, had a brand new car, and now he didn't even have money for an Uber? We went and picked him up the next day, and I got out and ran up and gave him a hug, and he seemed oddly unresponsive to my affection, so I just shrugged it off and showed him to the front passenger seat where I'd been sitting. He was super tall, so I let him sit up there and I hopped in the back. When we got back to our house, we showed him to our guest room, and he put his things down and then immediately asked if we could take him to the grocery store. James said he was done driving for the day, so I said I'd take him, but commented that I thought he didn't have any money on him. He told me he had food stamps, which there's no way he would have qualified for with his old job. So I knew something was up, but I wasn't going to dig into the personal details of his finances. So I just logged it in my mind and kept my mouth shut. You might be thinking, it just sounds like someone who fell on hard times. And that was basically Mike's story as well. But it was just very vague in important areas, and full of story after story about people that seemed determined to destroy him for no known reason whatsoever. 1 or 2 bad eggs are believable, but no one is the innocent victim in every scenario. He was telling us that he had no idea why his life had fallen apart, and why those close to him seemed to turn on him out of nowhere, or why so many people were out to get him without seeming to have any motivation. 2 nights turned into a week, and finally, James asked Mike what his plan was. Mike acted hurt and said he'd be gone by morning. We told him he didn't need to leave immediately, but we'd like to have some kind of an idea of his plan for going forward. That night in bed, James and I discussed it, and decided we'd tell Mike that he could stay for as long as he needed if he wanted to help out around the house and keep his room relatively clean, because it contained several antique items of James's. We also were going to ask him to help me with some entrepreneurial decisions, as Mike had claimed to have been a totally self-made successful entrepreneur before his streak of bad luck, a series of unfortunate events, and I had recently been laid off. We presented our offer the next day, and Mike excitedly accepted. We thought it was going to be a rewarding trade-off for all parties. Now, this isn't a story about my marriage, so I'm not going to go too far into the wealth of problems James and I had, but a little info will be necessary. James was highly critical of me, and often talked down to me, and seemed to have nothing but negative opinions. I wasn't perfect, but I wanted to be loved, worked my arse off for James' approval. I was constantly trying to make him happy, but no matter what I did, I would fail in his eyes. After a few weeks, Mike clearly started to see the cracks in the marriage despite the fact that James toned it down in Mike's presence. Trying to be a good wife, I acted like all was fine in front of Mike and never mentioned any dissatisfaction in my marriage. Mike and I started to spend a lot of time alone in our entrepreneurial pursuits. He was supposed to be teaching me the tricks of the trade within several avenues of making money, but we kept coming out with little success. He had excuses and explanations for why his wisdom didn't seem to be progressing us forward at all. But he was someone I greatly looked up to as a professional and a friend, so I just believed that it would all pay off soon, like he said. After living together for weeks, enough talking among all of us had been done to start noticing weird contradictions to many of the things Mike had told us. But he always worded things in a way that left a slight amount of room for doubt if you were to question any of it. There was never a way to straight up catch him in a lie. Mike also wasn't fulfilling his end of our deal at home, and kept saying he'd take his turn to do the dishes and such, but probably only did it once or twice. And he completely trashed the guest room. Not only was there garbage everywhere, but he'd bring in food and drinks, and they'd be lost in the sea of clothes and trash, and we could smell things rotting. There was a melted tub of ice cream sitting on the bedside table for weeks. I didn't care as much as James did, and I suggested we just remove his mum's things from the room, but I did agree that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, things were getting more and more icy with James and I, and one day, when I was out with Mike on a job, I broke down in tears about how much I was hurting about how James treated me. Mike offered words of comfort and reluctantly admitted that he'd picked up on how mean James could be to me, and said he was very sorry and that I didn't deserve it. Mike having been possibly the only witness I ever had to what I had been going through in my marriage, this was amazingly validating. Mike agreed that it was incredibly unjustified, but he made me promise not to tell James that he'd said anything, because he didn't want to appear like he was taking sides. The next day, Mike had once again volunteered to take a turn doing the dishes, so I didn't do them. I hate doing dishes and happily left them for Mike when he assured me he'd handle it. Well, Mike got a call informing him that his dad didn't have long to live, so he wanted to go see him. James didn't seem at all interested in helping, so I volunteered to take him and to stay for moral support, and we headed out. On the way to see his dad, Mike started to tell me his dad has dementia and makes up weird things, so he advised me not to take anything to heart. He cited a few examples of things he'd previously said, and they were all more like accusations. One of them being that Mike had stolen all the money in his savings. I thought it was pretty odd, but couldn't really reconcile the vast difference between the Mike I had met 8 years before and someone who could rob his dying father. While we were visiting his dad, I didn't say much, as I didn't want to insert myself into a private family moment, but I kept noticing things that were weird. Like that, his dad was fully conscious and talkative and didn't seem like a dying man at all. He even asked us to get him a Burger King in the middle of it all. I kept trying to justify things in my head like, who am I to say a dying man can't want a final meal at Burger King? A few hours in, James called, irate that I had left again without doing the dishes that Mike promised to do. He chewed me out and threatened divorce, which was always his go-to to try to whip me into shape, and having the recent affirmation from Mike that I wasn't the only one who saw James' emotional abuse, I said fine. Divorce won't be thrown in my face anymore, so divorce it is. Back in Mike's dad's room, his dad was yelling about his will and money and such, and Mike looked at me in a way to signal that the dementia was talking. I had started to really question what happened with his dad, and if he was really even dying at all, but it wasn't something I could really handle investigating at the moment, given that I had just separated from my husband. When we left the hospital, Mike's dad was still alive and eating candy bars. I had nowhere else to go, so I went back home and slept upstairs on the couch. I didn't speak to James for 2 whole days, and then Mike said he'd talk to his mum, and I could stay there for a week. I wondered why his mom wasn't the one helping him, if they were in contact and on good terms, but I just accepted the offer. I couldn't take being at that house anymore. Mike said he was going to go with me and stay there too, which I thought looked really bad, but he said he spoke to James and that he understood and was fine with it. I spent the entire week crying and talking to Mike about how I felt, and he even woke up in the middle of the night with me if I woke up and started spiraling downhill. He made no advances on me, or anything of the sort. After the week, I went to stay with my parents, and Mike went back to stay with James. I eventually saw them both when I'd come over to get things, and in talking with James, he was very much ready for Mike to leave. They barely seemed to talk, and did not seem on good terms whatsoever. One night, I got the weirdest impulse to ask James if Mike ever said anything about me that he made him promise not to tell me. James hesitated for a second, but said yes. Through a series of questions, we inched through both of our experiences with Mike. He had been playing into our rapidly declining marriage and using everything he observed against us. He had been going out and teaching me things to make money, and he did the same thing he did as my boss all those years before. He told me my strengths and complimented my ability to catch on to things quickly. We didn't have much excess, but it was very obviously not on account of me. However, he was going back and feeding into James's terrible opinion of me, and claiming we weren't making any money because I was so dense and hard to teach. Mike would also comment on the very same things he told me were unacceptable that James did, except he'd tell James he doesn't know how he lives with someone like me, and that he'd go insane. He was carefully and strategically forcing our marriage to fall apart by exacerbating our personal fears and insecurities, and systematically validating and encouraging our resentment for one another. He did it in such a way that neither of us doubted his sincerity for a moment, until I finally got a weird feeling and decided to ask that night. And even then, I didn't really anticipate finding out that he'd been two-faced and manipulative to that extreme. James kicked him out that night, and neither of us have talked to him again. As far as I know, I haven't spoken to James in 1.5 years. I proceeded with the divorce despite this, because even though Mike was an insincere piece of shit, he caused me to get enough distance from James that I was able to see I deserved so much better. The last I heard about Mike was from his mum, who called me to see why he'd been asked to abruptly leave James' house. I told her what he'd done, and she didn't seem surprised. I asked if she was aware of any mental problems he may have, and she said she didn't want to betray her son by giving details, but that he isn't right in the head. I asked about several of the traumatic events Mike had claimed to be the victim of, and she said there has never been evidence that any of it really happened. I don't know why he actively initiated the final downfall of my marriage, because I've never felt it was an attempt to be with me. I don't get what his motivation or gain would have been. Mike's mom texted me a few days after he left James' house to tell me he had been admitted into a psychiatric facility and wouldn't be out for a long time. She wouldn't elaborate. So, former boss turned friend turned delusional sociopath. Let's not meet again. Yeah, that was a lot. These stories really make you wonder how many people are walking around carrying the burdens and secrets no one knows about. Some of them were straight up chilling, and the fact that they're real, even worse. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. Don't forget to like the video if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments which story rubbed you the wrong way, or just drop something for the algorithm. You know how it goes. Also, it's a new month, and I'm trying to map out story ideas and content for the next few weeks. So if you've got any suggestions, themes, or specific kinds of stories you want me to do, definitely drop them in the comments. I'd love to read through them. Well, that's that. So I'll see you guys.